Hello and welcome, and thank you for popping along. In today's video we will be looking at a bus company that featured duck egg green as part of its livery. It also managed to avoid operating the Leyland National. How did it do that? Oh, and one of its buses starred in an episode of Inspector Morse. Oh, sorry, I misread that. Inspector Morse. So where are we? We are, of course, in Oxford, and we will be looking at the City of Oxford motor services. This story of City of Oxford motor services really starts way back in 1881, when the City of Oxford and District Tramways companies commenced operations. They operated horse-drawn trams and would eventually end up with a network that would serve Abingdon Road, Banbury Road, Cowley Road and Walton Street, as well as both Oxford and Oxford-Rewley Road railway stations. I hope I pronounced Rewley Road correctly. If I didn't, please comment down below and berate me. The company also operated horse-drawn buses as well to fill in the gaps in the service in the tramway network. By 1906, all of this was taken over by the City of Oxford Electric Tramways Limited. Now, the plan was for the entire tramway network to be electrified. However, this proved to be rather optimistic because environmentalists prevented electric traction from appearing on the streets of Oxford. Can you imagine now if one of those Edwardian environmentalists was propelled into the future, into today's current craze for electric vehicles? They would be absolutely mortified, wouldn't they? Isn't it strange how fads and trends come and go, isn't it? In 1913, motor bus operation commenced in Oxford, and this would see the company being renamed the City of Oxford Motor Services Limited, which was formed in 1921. The early traction was provided by Daimler buses. Now, just to confuse things a little bit, the company that had been registered in 1906, when they changed the name through to the City of Oxford Electric Tramways Limited, remember I said the electric tramways that didn't run electric trams? Well, this was a subsidiary of a group called NEC, and this is one that we've not actually seen in this series before. I don't think we have anyway. NEC stood for National Electric Construction Company Limited. But in 1931, NEC was taken over by BET, British Electric Traction, which is a group that we've seen on here quite a few times, isn't it? Also around this time, in the early 1930s, the Great Western Railway purchased a 50% interest in the company. City of Oxford Motor Services standardised on AEC chassis and operated Regals, Regents, Reliances, Bridgemasters, Renowns and Swifts. The last traditional half-cab front-engined single-decker buses to be purchased were 29 Willowbrook-bodied Bristol Regal 3s, which joined the fleet in 1949-1950. Now, just to show how loyal City of Oxford was to AEC, at the end of the 1950s, its entire fleet of over 250 vehicles was of AEC manufacture. The first forward entrance double-decker buses in the fleet were 10 Willowbrook-bodied AEC Regent 5s, which were delivered in 1960. These buses seated 63 passengers and were the last Regents to be purchased by the company. Now, in a breakaway from the AEC buying policy, in 1961 the company purchased 5 Dennis Lowlines. Now, the Lowline was a licence-built version of the Bristol Lowdecker, which was built by Dennis Brothers of Guildford. And I think probably it was the cleverest of all the low-height and low-decker style buses that came out of that time. The likes of Leyland and AEC decided to go their own way and make their own designs up, and this would see things like the Leyland Lowlander or the AEC Bridgemaster and later the AEC Renown. But Dennis went into partnership with Bristol Commercial Vehicles and built the low-decker itself under licence. And this, of course, was helped by the fact that one of the top knobs of Bristol commercial vehicles, had moved across to Dennis Brothers of Guildford. So I would think the relationship between the two companies was fairly amicable. These Dennis Lowlines that were purchased by City of Oxford Motor Services were actually fitted with AEC engines. So there was a little bit of a compromise really, wasn't there? However, this switch to Dennis chassis wasn't to last, and the following vehicles that came along, were low height of course, were AEC Bridgemasters. But by 1963, the AEC renown had started to appear in the fleet, and a total of 43 had been purchased by 1967, which, coincidentally or not, was when AEC decided to stop building double-decker bus chassis. In common with a lot of other major bus companies, in 1969, City of Oxford Motor Services Limited became a subsidiary of the National Bus Company. And in January 1971, City of Oxford assumed control of South Midland Motor Services Limited, and this would see them acquiring 34 coaches in the process. Now, South Midland had led, in recent years at least, a bit of a nomadic existence. In 1945 it had been purchased by Red and White, and when Red and White had sold out to the British Transport Commission in 1950, it was put under the control of Thames Valley. This, of course, being the closest Tilling subsidiary nearest to South Midland's Oxford base. South Midland Motor Services Limited was renamed National Travel Midlands Limited in 1973, and the City of Oxford's fleet name was changed from Oxford to Oxford South Midland. This would see 34 coaches enter the Oxford fleet, some which were fitted with the rather classy-looking duple Bella Ventura bodywork, which was very similar to the Bella Vega. Now, no matter how nice these bodies look, unfortunately they seem to be built out of balsa wood, and they never seem to be totally structurally sound, did they? Now, I don't know if any, or how many, I should say, of these duple Bella Ventura or Bella Vega bodywork actually exist or survive today. I'm sure there's got to be at least one or two in preservation, hasn't there? Let me know down below. I'd be interested to find out whether people have actually taken the plunge and preserved the duple Bella style bodywork. Now, in the introduction, I said that part of the livery was duck egg green. Well, City of Oxford's livery as whole was red, maroon and duck egg green. And to be honest, this has got to be one of the most stunning, striking liveries that has ever been put on a bus. Now, I know people will say, well, East Yorkshire was better, or Birmingham was better, or something like that. Everybody's got their own favourite livery, haven't they? But even me, coming from Kent, who likes the East Kent maroon and cream and the Maidstone and District green and cream, appreciates how beautiful the Oxford livery actually is. Sadly, under the National Bus Company ownership, this would change to poppy red. Now, I have to admit, being a child of the 70s, and I'm sure there's a few of you out there in the same situation as me, I grew up with the poppy red, I grew up with the National Bus Company leaf green, and I actually like them. I think they're actually really nice, bright, 70s style colours, very bright, gaudy, and they're rather attractive. But when you see that they've replaced liveries like this, I can totally understand why people hate the poppy red and the leaf green colours. Because it must be like our generation when we started to see the deregulation liveries come out, and you'd see the maroon and cream of East Kent come back, and you'd see the apple green and cream of Southdown come back, only to be swept away by the stagecoach stripes. Anyway, Jake, once again, you're getting distracted. I do apologise. Now, like a lot of other bus companies around this time, City of Oxford, or Oxford South Midland, was experiencing quite a severe staff shortage. Now, the company's situation was exasperated by the fact that Morris Motors had a factory fairly close to the bus garage. And I think I'm right in saying that the pay at Morris Motors was a little bit better than it was for working on the buses at the time. To help ease this staff shortage, Oxford decided to go for one-man operation, as of course again did a lot of other bus companies around this time. Initially, Oxford went for the Daimler Fleetline for its rear-engined buses. However, the first 3 Bristol VRs would enter the fleet in April 1970, this being a diverted order from Southern Vectors down here on the Isle of Wight. These would be OFC 901H, OFC 902H and OFC 903H, with, incidentally, OFC 901H being the first Series 2 Bristol VR that was delivered to a National Bus Company subsidiary. More Bristol VRs would follow. Indeed, these would be the vehicles that would help convert the City of Oxford motor services fully to one-man operation. Some of the later batches of Bristol VRs would be to the slightly rarer dual door layout. The Bristol VR would go on to be virtually the standard bus in the City of Oxford fleet at that time. The other favourite of the National Bus Company, the Leyland National, failed to enter the fleet as new. Now at the time, City of Oxford were running mostly double-decker buses. And aside from some coaches, there wasn't really a need for the Leyland National. Now, one little nugget that I have seen during my research, and I don't know how true it is, maybe you can confirm or deny this, is that apparently City of Oxford ordered some Mark II Nationals with high-back seating and high-speed axles for the 190 to London, although in the end Leopards arrived instead. Now it was around this era that the London to Oxford coach services started to really take off. The non-stop coach service had started way back in 1963 and had a journey time of 2 hours and 15 minutes. Now originally both South Midland and Oxford had run their own separate services to London, but when they merged, obviously the routes were merged as well. These were given the route numbers of 30, which was the Oxford Henley London service, and the 70, the Oxford High Wycombe London services, but these were changed to 390 and 290 in 1975. By 1975, of course, the M40 motorway between London and Oxford was open, and from 1977 a regular non-stop service was started as Route 190, but this was later renumbered the X90. Later, an additional non-stop service, the X70, was also started between Oxford and Heathrow Airport. With the relaxation of the National Bus Company's National Express corporate look, Oxford would go on to adopt a rather bold but striking livery for these coaches, and this would consist of white, blue and yellow. The blue, of course, being Oxford blue for the official colour of the University of Oxford. These coaches would make extensive use of the Venetian blind style livery, which was quite popular at the time, which featured blocks of yellow and blue moving down the side of the vehicle, almost in like a speed stripe, whilst a bold fleet name of Oxford CityLink was also carried. In the 1980s, the route was so popular that it managed to support the operation of Metroliner coaches, and these were the type that were used normally by National Express on rapid services. And in all fairness, the whole story of the Oxford to London motorway service is probably worthy of a video in its own right. If you'd like to see such a video, please comment down below and let me know. In the run-up to privatisation and deregulation, City of Oxford motor services was split in 1983, and this would see Oxford and South Midland units separated. The city services and the London routes would be allocated to the Oxford Bus Company, with the remainder of the network passing to South Midland. When privatisation came, both companies were sold initially to management buyouts. Now at that time there was a third operator in the area, another one who was inspired by deregulation, and this was Thames Transit. Thames Transit had been set up by the minibus tycoon Harry Blundred in March 1987. Harry Blundred, of course, was the force behind Devon General and was a big believer that minibuses were the way forwards. Now you know what I'm going to say, don't you? If you'd like to see a video about Thames Transit and those early years and all the competition, and even the Docklands Transit, because they had fingers in many pies, as you can imagine, during deregulation, please comment down below. This was a very interesting time within the bus industry, and I think a lot of people, it got their backs up because they were seeing big buses that they grew up with disappearing and being replaced by these, what they would call bread vans. Now, I like minibuses personally, as you can probably tell by the content that's been on the channel in the last few weeks. Indeed, I used to own an old Snoopy Nose Mark III Transit, unfortunately not one of Harry Blundered's buses. But anyway, back to the story. In 1989, Thames Transit bought South Midland, which by now, of course, had established itself as the country area of the City of Oxford motor services. This, of course, would see a massive expansion for Thames Transit. Now, at that time, as I said previously, Oxford was predominantly a big bus fleet, running mostly double-deckers. And Thames Transit were running their minibuses approximately every 4 or 5 minutes, the frequency of which started to pull passengers away from the City of Oxford. The City of Oxford were also facing competition on their express service to London, the Oxford City Link, with Thames Transit's Oxford Tube coach service chomping at their heels. This would be the start of quite a considerable bus war between two subsidiaries, which at one point was one company. To counteract all these minibuses flying around from Thames Transit, Oxford Bus Company launched the Oxford City Nipper minibuses. Now, Oxford had started using minibuses slightly prior to this, but this had ramped things up a little bit. And soon Oxford's full transits were replaced by something a little bit more stylish, something that we looked at in a video a little while ago, MCW Metro Riders. And I'm going to try and put a little link in the top right hand corner to the Metro Rider video so you can watch that at your leisure. Well, once you've watched this video at least. Now, just to confuse things even more, in 1990 Oxford Bus Company acquired the High Wycombe operations of the B Line. B Line was the northern half of Alder Valley, and these services were branded the Wycombe Bus Company by Oxford, and this would finally introduce Leyland Nationals into the Oxford fold. March 1994 would see the Oxford Bus Company being purchased by the Go Ahead Group, and again I did a video on Go Northeast and Northern General, and that really is the start of the whole Go Ahead thing, isn't it? The whole Go Ahead story. Now, at this point, the bus war was still going on with Thames Transit, and the takeover by Go Ahead strengthened the competition on behalf of Oxford. Go Ahead introducing rebranding on routes and introducing new vehicles. Later, they would introduce more competitive fares as well. This bus war would eventually end in the autumn of 1996, with both firms withdrawing from competitive routes and increasing fares on the routes that they were already running. In July 1997, Thames Transit was sold to Stagecoach, this eventually becoming Stagecoach Oxford and then Stagecoach in Oxfordshire. In 2004, Oxford Bus Company moved out of its long-established garage at Cowley Road in Oxford. Now, anyone who's ever read a book that came out back in the 1980s, and it's called Buses Behind the Scenes, and it's written by Kevin Lane. And as the title suggests, it looks at what goes on behind the closed doors of bus garages. And many of the pictures were actually taken at the Cowley Road depot, and it's somewhere that I've never ever been, but I feel like I know it really well. And I'm sure people who've read the book will probably feel the same, and also feel a little bit of sadness that Cowley Road is no more. For those of you who've never actually looked at the book, it's in the same sort of format as the old Buses Annual, and it's an Ian Allen publication. It's available on Amazon. I'd say go and spend £5 and get a copy of it, because it's quite interesting. It's very nostalgic to the 1980s, and earlier in some cases. And if you don't like Amazon, it's also on eBay too. Have a look at World of Books on eBay. They'll have a copy. Oxford's new depot is now in Watlington Road. In June 2011, Go Ahead would also buy Thames Travel, followed by Carousel Buses in February 2012. And these companies act as subsidiaries of the Oxford Bus Company, although they share the management. Go Ahead would also go on to acquire Pullham's coaches from the Gloucestershire area. And again, this would remain a separate brand, but using the management of the Oxford Bus Company. Passenger figures on the X90 service between London and Oxford had been dropping since 2015. And on the 4th of January 2020, the service would be withdrawn. Today, Oxford operates 160 buses and coaches on a wide range of activities. There's high-frequency urban services in Oxford city centre, Kidlington, Abingdon and Didcot. There's express services still running, and these go to Heathrow and Gatwick airports. And they operate the largest park and ride system in the country, which has a capacity for 4,800 cars, which is linked to central Oxford by the bus services of Oxford Bus Company. In fact, the park and ride operation is again potentially worthy of a video in its own right. It was the first permanent park and ride system in the UK and started its operations on the 10th of December 1973 at Redbridge. Today there's 4 peripheral park and ride sites around Oxford. There's Thornhill, Seacourt, of course Redbridge and Pear Tree. In my rather warped mind, Pear Tree does sound like the sort of place that you'd find Alan Partridge lurking though, isn't it? Aha! And talking of television, there's that Inspector Morse link, isn't there? For those of you who may have missed the Inspector Morse craze of the late 1980s, Morse is an operatic and real ale fanatic detective who goes on to solve many murders in the Oxford area. Who knew Oxford was so dangerous? Now, all through the early series, Inspector Morse was a little bit of a mysterious character, never giving his first name out, and there was a lot of speculation at the time as to what his first name actually was. My money was on Mickey, but apparently it was Endeavour. Inspector Morse was played by the Sweeney actor John Thaw, and the series was mostly filmed in Oxford, and this would lead to many Oxford buses appearing in the background on various scenes. Most of these being Bristol VRs in National Bus Company Red in the early episodes, although later MCW Metro Riders, Metro Liners and Mercedes-Benz minibuses in the episode Last Bus to Woodstock, which was first aired on March the 22nd, 1988. One of the starring roles is taken by City of Oxford dual door Bristol VR KJO 510W. And the story centres around a young lady who's waiting for a bus but accepts a lift from a stranger instead. You should never do that, should you? That's a recipe for disaster, and sadly gets murdered. Well, there we go. We've reached the end of the story of the City of Oxford Motor Services, and for once it's one with a fairly happy ending. Although the company's owned by one of the main groups, it's managed to retain its identity, hasn't it? And as we say on this channel quite a lot, that main identity is very important. It builds up a brand with customers and passengers. After all, think of all the years that Heinz Baked Beans have been going using the same design, and again with Kellogg's Cornflakes. Their brands have been going for absolutely years, and people know exactly what they're getting and they know why they want to buy them. And I think this is something that the bus industry as a whole could learn from. Maybe instead of paying design consultancies hundreds of thousands of pounds at a time to redesign liveries and new graphics on bus stops and things, maybe they should just keep things as they are and build that brand up that they've already got. And of course that money could be invested back into services, couldn't it? If you did enjoy this episode of the A to Z of National Bus Company Subsidiaries, please like and share it. And don't forget you can hype videos as well, which again is like a super like, a mega like, and it gets us noticed more by YouTube, which is a good thing because it builds up the channel and it encourages me to make more videos like this. Don't forget to check out those other videos that I put the links into as well. And if you do enjoy what I do on this channel, you can buy me a drink by hitting the super thanks button. Thanks ever so much for watching. Take care. Bye for now.